Zimbabwe, Mystery of Ruins by Evan D. Colvin. When Rhodesian pioneers burst into the marshland and spread over a country in search of gold, they was vastly surprised to find that they had been anticipated. Over a great area of the gold-bearing country, 600 by 700 miles in extent, they found no open workings and closed mines by a shaft which went down in depth from 70 to 150 feet. They worked at a reach from lengths of 300 to 700,500 feet. The Begon miners must have been the industrious but long belief, since they worked in rock so sustained that the same sort of reef is needed nowadays to blast with dynamite, and yet they hardly removed many millions tons of ore. It was a practical testimony to their skill, and that the modern engineers follow to this day the lines of their ancient workings, which are so old they are silted at the top with a natural soil that is so the deepest of the opening mines at the level of the country round about, and trees grow where there once yawning cavities. In the face of the phenomenon was so oppressive and so unexpected that the pioneers were tempted to plunge into the world of wild surmise, and confidently attributed to these workers to the ancient Egyptians, Phoenicians, or Queen of Sheba. Their excuse for such romantic hypothesis lays in the fact that such Africans as they knew had no knowledge of either mining or mining. They faced, moreover, another phenomenon quickly impressive, where the surrounding natives lived in huts made of reed and clay. The area between Limpopo and the Zambezi was stretched of buildings of stone, in spectacular fashion. On the most impressive and largest of these remained a temple and an acropolis. Both questioned back in the words of Zimbabwe. Putting two and two together, they attribute the buildings and the mines to the same authorship. Here they said was an ancient affair, the city where Solomon attained gold and beautified the temple. These imaginative hypotheses were enlarged and decorated by early investigators, until the facts were a school in a tangle of theorizing, all drawn from the Oriental world, and none condescending and further than some hundreds of years before the Lord of our Christ, birth of our Lord. In 1906, however, a new discovery was known and struck by the publication of Dr. David Randall, Maclver, Medieval Rhodesia. This Egyptian intelligence had investigated the problem on the spot in 1905 and came to the conclusion that the remnants were not more ancient than 15th or 14th century AD, and there was no trace of architecture from the Oriental or European style of that period whatever, and that the remains were in fact native African. These conclusions startled a controversy in which the most recent expedition of Mrs. Gertrude and Canton Thomas and Mrs. Norrie and Mrs. K. Kenyon is the latest but unlikely to be the last word. At one of the meetings of the British Association in Johannesburg in August 1929, Mrs. Cannon Thompson answered Dr. Phoebus, who had declared that Zimbabwe was a relic of an ancient Eastern culture thousands of years before Christ. She found her arguments, like Dr. Randall Maclver, less upon theory than actual excavation, which she had carried out in a number of places. Through the foundations and up to the bedrock would seem to be conclusive that both were fragments of an Oriental porcelain, which they both found and were able to date the glasses. Arab glass, Persian furlings, and Nanjing China. All these porcelain date limits between 600 and 1300 AD. And like Dr. Maclver, Mrs. Canton Thompson rejected the theory that Zimbabwe was built by an alien race. Instead of the general offshoot of a higher Oriental civilization, she said, "You have, I believe, a vigorous native civilization, unsuspected by all, but a few students, showing national organization of a kind of originality and amazing industry." Such then is the general position of this controversy. But before going any further, let's look a little bit more closely at these curious remains. The main building in Zimbabwe, I hesitate to call it a temple, has for its chief feature a high containing wall and built in regular ellipses. Let the reader imagine a horseshoe of masonry 30 feet high, with gaps at either end to serve as entrances. Two or more crescent walls, and another gap between them enclosing the base. Thus, the area enclosed will be roughly used an external measure about 300 feet by 230 feet, and the interior of the enclosure contains other walls, one of them running along the side and encounter the outer wall, as long as it form a long, deep, narrow passage. There are, besides the remains, a roughly circular inner enclosure in the northern part of the area. Two of the curious cones of the tower, and the other end with the platform, and the remainder are several other walls and passages. It is difficult to see any plan or either rhyme or reason in general layout, which is altogether eccentric and irregular, like a castle built by children in the sand. There are traces of cement pavements, which still forms the flooring along deep patches and the level walls, which appears by numerous drains. It is certain, however, from the structure and the shape of the place, that the walls are never intended to carry a roof. The entrances are approached both but from the outside and the inside, and stepped in such a way to remind us of the stone stills seen in England, but there is no trace in the outer entrances of lintels to enclosed doorways. The only surviving ornamentation is the double-cross chevron pattern made by tilting the stones against one another, runs deep in considerable length, near the outer wall, and in a series of granite monoliths, upright posts along the summit. The walls are massive, taper about 10 to 16 feet at the base and about 8 to 9 feet thick at the top. They are built like the dry stone dikes are built in Scotland without mortar. The manner of this building is carried irregularly. There, where the two walls meet, there is no attempt to unite or interlock them. And while some of the building is smooth and regular, other parts are rough and careless. The stones are mainly rectangular blocks of granite averaging about 6 to 12 inches, and the use of such blocks in such a number is impressive at first sight. Such a truth of these base stones were either quarried, not chiseled. Over that part of Africa, there are plentiful outcrop of granite which rise above the ground in huge bubble rocks, and the surface at which flakes away under the weather like flakes from an onion. So the builders many had to break them up with hammers to produce the acquired quarry and dressed stone. Mother Nature provided her children with bricks almost ready-made. What was the purpose of this great encroachment? The temple theory is first propounded by Theodore Bent in his ruined cities in the Marshland. Others have taken the phallic emblems. These towers have been partially destroyed, but enough remains to suggest that their shape and plausibility of explanation. On the other hand, it is possible that these towers were built as carrying over some departed chief or some purpose which not have found the key yet. It may be said of the bent altar, which may again have not been, and have been used for sacrificial purposes. We have always been aware of drawing too confidently upon glimmer of the familiar to explain the unknown. In any event, only a corner of the area is occupied by these glittering, intriguing objects, to the event that the rest is historic interior design. F.P. Marsh Bellini, the courier of Zimbabwe ruins, mentions the addition of the Matabi, and of course of themselves are newcomers, that these buildings were raised by the Abazoli for cattle corrals, and added they are still in marshland in the remnants of a tribe known as the Manakaranga, or the Abazari, who spoke of as builders. It is noteworthy that the great place of the Lumbaba at the Bulawayo was divided into cattle corral and goat corral. It is easy to imagine the dominating idea of a tribe so situated to secure their herds at night from lions, leopards, wild dogs, hyenas, and jackals that infest those regions. The surrounding wall then might be a cattle corral of a tribe of a chief, and the enclosure might be used as also as surrounding the huts in the chief and his wives, his musicians, and his medicine man. Here is an explanation more commonplace and therefore less popular with those in the current general, but it need not to be, for that reason, contemptuously dismissed. As for the so-called Acropolis, it is radically inferior to the Citadel of Attica as a pot of African earthenware to the piece of Chinese porcelain, in fact, as the work of a savage to that of a civilized man. Its foundation is a great natural mass of granite rock and boulder, which rise over 200 feet above the plain in the neighboring temple. Each nook and cranny of these rocks have been ingeniously chiseled by the builders. Where, said Dr. Maclver, granite boulders was already outlined in an enclosure. They adapted their plan to form thus and suggested them to complete the apartment with masonry. Clefts have been converted into passages and adjusting crags into large platforms, and giant rocks chiseled to form a base of artificial walls. It is in fact, as he describes it, a labyrinth approach only, with difficulty by 2 steps in tortuous paths. Here again the masonry is primitive and barbarous. No lines are right, nor mortars are used. As for the decoration, it takes the same elementary form as a temple below, and there is no doubt that the two buildings were created in the same tradition, if not by the same architect. The approach of danger and the dwellers of the valley took refuge in the hills. When these buildings were explored by Bent and again by Hall, several sculptures of birds and crocodiles finely carved and finely monoliths on tails on soapstone were discovered and removed. And these, like the monoliths, have seemed to have been built into the top of the walls in a little manner of the gargoyles in the Gothic architecture, not however horizontally, but perpendicularly. The Besides these finds are numerous room objects in gold, copper, and irons were recovered. What chiefly excited speculation was the ingrate mounds of soapstone, and the soapstone center were rosettes, resembling some known examples of Phoenician pattern. There, besides the gold tacks and plates, as for wooden plating, and gold wiring, bangles, and beads, and so forth, in a profound fusion. Sir John Whibley, in his further excavations in Zimbabwe, mentions numerous fragments of clays, crucibles containing small beads of gold, although there is no odd workings within the radius about 20 miles of the ruins. Zimbabwe, as already mentioned, is one of a very large number of stone ruins scattered over this region of Africa. Thus, for example, high plateaus of Ghana and to the north of the Umtao, there are rough stone forts and more curious circular pits lined with stone. Approached by the stone-sided roof corridor, these pits indeed are not sunken into the ground, as originally supposed, but are the centers of the stone-built platform placed on the hillside. Pilgrims, white folks, in search of a picturesque has called them slave pits, but those who have felt the bitterly cold southeasterly winds from the frequent search of the higher regions are more reasonably surmised that they were made as shelters for the flocks of a shepherd race. In guests, which seems to find to support the fact that their now low corridors were blocked by a bar of wood in place of a passage and resting on the holes between the stones provided for that purpose. On one of these wooden bars was actually found in a shih tzu by Dr. Maclver in the passage of the similar pit in another series of ruins not far away. That investigator nevertheless advanced the theory that these pits were part of a scheme of defense, although how they could be defended rather than lost of explanation. The area in which this particular pit is found extends, Dr. Maclver says, more than over 50 square miles. There are few places within this large area where it's possible to walk 10 yards without stumbling into a wall, a building, or artificial stone heaps. The photographs show the immeasurable lines running one behind another in a whole row of the ground. These are built walls row on row and consist of plateau of the hill alike and thickly that is the most intriguing and the most difficult one to cross them. Almost everywhere there stones could rest have been piled upon one another. The inaccessible upper cliff of the great mountain had necessarily have been left untouched, but the lofty peak to the north of its wall and within a few feet of the summit. There are 9 or 10 well-defined hills in the circle of the view, and one stands at the central point, almost for 2 miles north of the great mountains. Each of these consists of a separate unit, complete with its own buildings, and divided at the bottom of its neighbor of imaginary wall. Such a boundary is first in a series of concrete lines, which rises above one another, and only a few feet apart, until the summit of the hill is attained. Then, arriving at the top of the ridge, after mounting over 30, sometimes 50 or more of these rigged lines, the explorer finds himself in the heart of the village, which its ancient inhabitants made so difficult to assess. Dr. Maclver surmised that these hill villages were inhabited by people who must have lived in perpetual apprehension of attack, and therefore protected themselves behind one of the vast series of entrenchment lines to be found in the world. It may be so, but I have seen hillsides in India and elsewhere terraced with dry stone walls in the same manners for purposes of cultivation. Furthermore, in granting, the water was once led down by finely engineered cuts and furrows on the moistened side of the seaside of the mountain. So they was cutting in that engineered cuts on the seaside of the mountain to bring water to the other side of the mountain. These irrigation canals and paste, Dr. Maclver, cultivation terraces that the almost desert country once supported a close population of agricultural and pastoral people who smelted iron and mined gold. Who were they? Where they came? And what became of them? Our thoughts. Inquiries have turned to the Portuguese archives for enlightenment, bordered only by a few tantalizing glimpses, and is not altogether fascinating between them and the area of the ruins in the east coast of Africa. There fall of thousands of feet of trackless and difficult region by foothills and feverish jungles, some 250 miles broad. The Portuguese, although on the Zambezi, they had established ports as far inland as Siena and Titi, generally preferred the coast. When they came towards the end of the 5th century, they found settlements of Arabs who at that time who drove the trade of the Indian Ocean and treated them as enemies to be exterminated. If these coast Arabs knew the secrets of the inland interior, they did not disclose them. There were, however, known to be considerable gold brought in quills in the form of wire from the interior, This trade the Portuguese continued. In 1572, Francisco Barreto pushed up the Zambezi at the head of a strong expedition and defeated the Mangas, but was conquered by the climate. Homan, his successor, was then a remnant of his men, who made a new attempt to push by way of Sofala. They expected, as said the Chronicle, to see everything in gold, but at last, when they got to the mines, they found only a few deep holes of earth. Some of the Kaffirs painfully at work. With the earth they began to dig, and they filled their basin with wash in the river. Each one attaining more from it than 5 grams of gold, altogether being a poor and miserable business. According to these chronicles and old maps, all of Kaffaria, from Sanabazal castles to the great river Zambezi, was ruled by a supreme chief or king, with the hereditary of Monomotapa. And the hearsay of the stories in the records in this capital, or capitals, the Zimbo, as it was called. Thus, Manuel de Sousa speaks of some buildings and wonderful structures with inscriptions unknown characters, but the native know nothing of their foundation. And the goes and sparks a great stone building with inscription over the door. Although in those days, as it is in these, the natives of Africa never raised stone upon stone, and lived only in huts, reed, straw, and mud. As for the African record, they suggest a trade with East Africa about the 10th century of our era, which make mention of Sofala, in particular as a land rich in gold, but they are no less vague than the Portuguese about the interior. It may be taken as established that the buildings were already there and were already old when the Portuguese first went to East Africa. It may also be taken that for certain that fragments of Chinese and Saracen pottery were found as to be asserted on the floor of Zimbabwe, which dates to a particular building as medieval. But it does not end the controversy more than the date of the building of the St. Paul, fixed in the period of London. The stone and the flint implements found among the debris and enormous extent of gold mines, which have been worked on by a slow process of hand labor, alike suggests an occupation not of centuries, but merely 1,000 years. All right, so they say this kingdom is very old. The ruins go as far west as Tati in Buchanland, and there Dr. Leo Phineas claimed to be found an ancient ceramic or hard pottery birds akin to the ceramic period of Eastern Mediterranean of the later Stone Age. It may be so, although birds, crocodiles, and other animals were still being molded out of clay in quite recent times by African natives. Before the controversy as a mere source of this culture can be settled, there's a great deal of work to be done. Most of Africa is yet unexplored from an archaeological standpoint of view, but it's notable that the Axum in Abyssinia there remains similar to Rhodesia, with the Hammerton Sabian inscriptions. Now the Sabians were already in the 2nd century before Christ, who had established and on the authority of emphasis nation. Moreover, Chromius, an Egyptian monk of the 6th century of our era, mentioned that the Axum might export a country so far south that the winter in those regions coincide with the summer among us. This overland expedition, like the sea voyage of the sailors of Thousands in the land of Punt, is perhaps a little too vague to be found anything definite upon. But there may be found an archaeological link between the north and south of Africa to reinforce the resemblance of Livingstone noted between the domestic of ancient Egyptians and the tribal customs of Buchanland. What became of the people who built and mined and irrigated and cultivated the soil for these highlands of East Africa? We get a hint of their sudden and terrible end at the Portuguese archives, or refer to the excursion of great hordes of savages, cannibals into the kingdom of Monomotapa. Those miners and agricultures were doubtless overwhelmed and eaten by such an advancing horde. As the Matatabele destroyed the Moshan, so the Zembas or other such invaders out of the dark and unknown center of Africa swept over this civilization and left it as it is, utterly ruined and nameless. Now that's the story of the great Zimbabwe builders. As you see, as we heard before, they admitted that these builders are African. You know, these are native African buildings. And as he said, you know, I'm going to quote this from the book. The stone and flint implements found among the debris an enormous extent of the gold mines, which must have been worked on by a slow process of hand labor. A light suggestion of a century, but merely of thousands of years. So we talking about this kingdom been around for a long, long, long time. Also want to make sure that this quote is reinforced and backed up too. That Livingston said that, maybe found upon archaeological sites that link the north and the south of Africa to reinforce the resilience what Livingston noted between the desolate life of ancient Egypt and the tribal customs of Buchanland. So, yes, they got the same customs as the Egyptians. That's according to Dr. Livingston, if you want to hear a source on that one. So, yes, we was doing our thing. Yes, we was doing what was righteous for our people and taking care of them. Anyway, this is a Koski of Fun Day. Hold on, let me go one more thing before I let y'all go on this one. How they said it was most definitely African. The book that it come from is Daniel, Medieval Indonesia. Medieval Rhodesia, as they called it back then. That he came in the 14th century, the Oriental or European style, that preferred period, whatever, and the remains were in fact definitely African. So they're admitting that these are Africans. The woman, Miss Cole, whatever, said, she said the same thing. I believe that a vigorous native civilization, unsuspected by all but a few students, showing national organization of a kind of originality and amazing industry. So I hope you enjoy this series, Grandmaster Builders of Africa. This one's starting off with the great Zimbabwe, that's not really talked about much. And it says many, many, many stone applications all through Southern Africa. And we're going to find out some more of those. Anyway, subscribe to the channel. Much love. Thank you for doing it for you and yours. I keep on pushing, keep on striving. So, we're going to be dropping more history like this. I got a couple more books on great African builders and builders of our society that we need to bring back to our children, which is part of nation building and the cooperative. The economic cooperative, the building cooperative, all this had to go hand in hand to make this stuff happen. So, I'm glad I'm able to bring this to y'all. Much love to y'all. Peace.